Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a go at the introduction question. So let's get started and see what we're going to be learning about today. So we're going to look at some history today about something that happened in the past. Now, we've been learning, all about the Great Fire of London. And a very important thing that happened with that is firefighters. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn about firefighters. Have they always looked like the way they do now? Have they always had fire trucks or fire engines? And we're going to see how it's changed over time. So if there's a fire now, we're very lucky and we have a fire service as part of our emergency services. So we have fire, we have ambulance, we have police. We're very lucky that they help us very quickly. So if there's a fire, we can call 999. We spoke about that a few weeks ago. And the fire service will come very quickly and they will put out the fire. They do other jobs too. Sometimes they can help rescue animals, or they can help people stuck in cars, or if you get stuck somewhere, they can help you. So we're very lucky now that we have a fire service, but we didn't always have them. A long time ago, there was no such thing as a firefighter. So if we think about the Great Fire of London, so it's over 350 years ago, there was a fire in London. As we know, it started in a baker's shop on Pudding Lane on the 2nd of September 1666. And the reason why the fire was so bad is because all of the houses and the shops were made from wood and they were built very close together. So that meant that the fire just spread so quickly because we know that wood burns really easily, and when the buildings are all very close together, the fire can spread. And unfortunately, what made it even worse was there was no fire service. People couldn't call 999. People couldn't ask the fire service to come and help them because it didn't exist. So people had to try and put out the fire themselves. But all they had were buckets made from leather that they filled up with water, but they were only about this big. They had some axes and fire hooks that they were using to pull down the buildings, remember? And they had something called a squirter, which almost looks a bit like a water pistol. Not very powerful. You can't get a lot of water in there, especially when the whole building is on fire. It wouldn't make much of a difference. So the way that they would do it was they'd have a long line of people, maybe 30 people, and the person at the end of the line would be next to the River Thames. They would fill up the bucket with water and they would pass it from person to person to get it to the building. But that would have taken a long time, wouldn't it? So it wasn't very helpful. It's not like now when we have a fire engine that has a big hose and it can squirt all the water very quickly. Back then, that was a big problem. They could not put out the fire in time because they had nothing or nobody to help them. So they used to, as well, as we know, explode their houses, didn't they, using gunpowder. So they would create what is called a fire break. That means because the houses were so close together, the fire was spreading because it would go from one house to another very quickly. If they blew up the house in the middle, then that would mean that the fire couldn't travel from one house to another because there was a gap. So that's called a fire break. So it stopped the fire from spreading. Because as we know, the fire burned for days and days and days. And at the end, so many buildings were destroyed. So many people's houses had burnt. It was a big, big mess. So after this horrible thing happened, people thought to themselves, we need to change something. We need to make something to help us in case there's a fire like this again, because we can't have this happen again. So as there were not many buildings left, most of them had burnt, they decided that they needed to build new buildings. But they thought, we're not going to use wood again because we know that burns easily. So they started to build from brick. And brick is what we make houses out of now, because they know that brick doesn't burn as easily. So they started to started to make it out of bricks. And the streets were made wider. that means the houses were not as close together because they remembered that that was how the fire spread so quickly. So they made the houses further apart. So 1 year after the Great Fire of London, the first fire service was set up. So exactly a year after it. And they would go to a fire and put the fire out if people needed it. So, but it wasn't like the fire service we have now. What they would do is you would have to pay them to put the fire out on your house. So then, 200 years after that, just under 200 years, there were 10 fire brigades in London. They all joined together to make one big service. And luckily, this was a very good idea, so that then the government, so the people in charge of England thought, this is a really good idea. We should make everybody do this because it's safe. And so they made a law that said that every place in the UK had to have a fire service or a fire brigade. So everywhere in the UK had to have a fire service in case there was a fire, they would come and help you. So the people in charge of England made that happen. So if we think back to what the uniform looked like, so what the fire fighters would wear and their equipment, so what they would use, back in 1666, when the Great Fire of London happened, they didn't have a uniform because there was no such thing as a firefighter. It didn't exist. Instead, normal people, all they could use were leather buckets that looked a bit like this, axes to pull down the houses, squirters to squirt the water, and fire hooks to pull down the houses. So they had no uniform and they didn't have very good equipment to help them. So 200 years later, in 1866, they got a bit better. So they would wear a uniform that looked like this. So they'd wear a blue uniform, looking very professional. And they would wear helmets to protect them in case they got hurt. And their equipment looked like this. So it doesn't look like a fire engine yet, does it? But it looks a bit better than what they had before. So they had an axe and a hose spanner, and they had fire trailers that were pulled by horses. So in here, they could put lots of water and squirt it. So that's a bit better. But cars didn't exist then. So they still had to use horses to pull the carts. So they wouldn't have got to the fires very quickly. But it is getting better. So in the Second World War, that was a big war that happened in England, between England, they improved things even more because in the Second World War, England was having lots of fires because they were getting bombed. So they had to put the fires out very quickly. So they decided to make the fire fighters even better. So this is a picture here you can see. Now it's a long time ago because it's in black and white. So they had to wear a steel helmet this time. Steel is very, very strong. It doesn't break, to protect them. They had to wear rubber boots on their feet and trousers. So they had a uniform. And this time they had pumps that looked like this, where the water would come out of, that was towed by a taxi. So it was pulled along still. They still weren't going very quickly. It was still pulled along. But at least this time they have protective uniform to keep them safe, and they have a hose. So the water would have got out quicker, much better than a bucket. And in 1974, so that's about 40 years ago now, they started to look like this. So this is looking a bit similar to what we have now, isn't it? So they would wear yellow leggings so that you can see them. They'd obviously have their helmets on. And this time they had what looks a bit like a fire engine. So it's getting better and better. And in 1989, so 30 years ago, they had a suit that was very protective. So now we know that firefighters can run into a house if it's on fire because they have a special clothes that make sure that they don't burn. It protects them in the top and in the trousers. And they would have, finally, they got their fire engine with blue flashing lights. I don't know if you've seen that before. A fire engine go past you on the road and you can see the lights flashing and you can hear it. and the fluorescent yellow lights. That means bright yellow lights so that you can see it. So, as you can see, today firefighting is very, very different compared to the Great Fire of London, isn't it? So today they wear a uniform that looks like this, that's a gold colour so that they can be seen always. And it's made from a special material that protects them from the fire so that they don't get hurt. And they wear helmets that has a built-in torch in case it's dark where they're going. And they have radios, so almost like a mobile phone, so that they can speak to each other. And here there's even a gas mask to protect them from the smoke, also to keep them safe, and rubber gloves to keep them safe. And as we know, if you've seen one before, they go into the fire in a fire engine. So in the future, they're hoping that they will use electricity to use these fire engines so that it's better for the environment. And the most clever part of all is they wear a tracking device. That means on their uniform, they have something that tells everyone where they are. So in case they have to go into a building by themselves or in a underground, if somebody is stuck, they have a tracker that tells us exactly where they are in case we can't see them. So that's very important to keep the firefighters safe. This is also a special camera that can see in the dark and see how warm things are. So that can show firefighters if they go into a building and they can't see because there's so much smoke, they have this camera, they point the camera and the camera can pick up on things that are hot. So things like people. So they can use the camera to go through the smoke, find people and save them. So firefighters work very, very hard. They work for a long time and they can work at nighttime also. But that's because there always need to be firefighters. If there's a fire at night, you might need a firefighter. If there's a firefighter during the day, you might need a firefighter. So it's really important and they are very, very special that they're there to help us all the time when we need to call 999. So hopefully you've learnt lots and lots about how firefighters have changed from 1666 to now. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to choose challenge 1, challenge 2, or challenge 3. So I'll explain those to you. If you want to do challenge 1, if you're not feeling very confident, you can print this out, it's on the form, or you can draw it, it doesn't matter. You have to draw a picture of what firefighters looked like in 1666. So think about their uniform, think about their equipment, the things they used, and then you're going to draw a picture of what firefighters look like now. So you could even draw the fire engine if you want. Don't forget to colour it in the correct colours. That's challenge 1. Challenge 2, again, you're going to draw a picture of what firefighters looked like in 1666 and what they look like now. And then under that, you're going to write down something that's the same and something that is different. So something that's the same is I could say firefighters still help us to put out fires. That's never changed, has it? But there's lots of things that are different. I'll let you have a think about that. The sheet is on the form. If you don't have a printer, you can just write it for me. Challenge 3, if you're feeling very confident, is you're going to print this out or draw it. It says similarities and differences. So similarity means something that is the same. So you're going to write down something that's the same about firefighters in the past and firefighters now. And you're going to write down different things about firefighters in the past and firefighters now. The differences is much easier. It's hard to find things that are the same. So that's challenge 3 if you're feeling very confident. So please let me know if you have any questions about that. And don't forget to upload your work on the form or on Class Dojo. Bye.